Hello, good morning. Today is Sunday, May 16th, 2021. I am here to record myself for a variety of different reasons. The first reason is that I have waited far too long to get my voice out into the world, and part of it is because I've had difficulty with the medium that I've wanted to do that in, which is writing. Part of it is that other things in my life have gotten in the way, and I've always deprioritized this, at least in comparison to all these other things. And so I just never have found a way to communicate on a regular basis about the things that I care about, like putting my thoughts into words and putting it out there for the world. Another thing is just because I'm afraid of cancel culture. I know it's all the rave with people these days, with the right wing in particular, but it's a thing, and I worry about it because unfortunately I don't have the financial stability to just do whatever I want or say whatever I want without some risk to my job, reputation, whatever. And I want to have a middle-class life at the very least, which is becoming increasingly hard here in the U.S. of A. That tells you something about me. I'm actually in Chicago, Illinois. A clever person who sees this could easily figure it out, who I am. But not that anyone would be doing this now. Maybe someday. Maybe not. Probably not. But yeah, let's see. What's on my mind today? What do I want to talk about? I would like to talk about identity. I think identity is a problem fundamentally. The more I think about identity and its role in the world, the more I see it as an issue that needs to be fixed or evolved or even eliminated. I don't know what the right answer is, but basically my critique of identity is that I think that because identities are shaped largely before you're born, there's not a lot of choice involved, right? And so you're given a set of beliefs that may or may not be what you would naturally be inclined to, if there can even be such a thing as naturally. That's its own debate. And your inclination is it's how do I say this? It's culturally determined, so you don't actually have the sort of means to objectively decide what identity you want to take on. And it not only is it imposed upon you by virtue of your birth, but also the society itself within that society decides what role you're supposed to fill. And so I think that right now to be open about my values and what I care about. So I'm someone who wants freedom for all, as well as a basic standard of living that dignifies human life. And so for me is everyone having health care, everyone having a house, everyone having food and water, opportunity in terms of education, in terms of job opportunities for training. All of these things I think need to be, and then community I think is another one that people need. And I also have a lot of ideas about that and questions about that. But, I want everyone to thrive, but I also want people to have freedom, so I want people to be able to choose the life that they want to live, as in, that I want them to be able to decide what religion they are going to be or lack thereof, or what career they're going to be, or how they perform their identity, right? If they want to be what's considered masculine in a culture, or feminine, or what's considered heterosexual or homosexual or third gender, or whatever it might be, There's so many, and so I think that the reason that it's a problem is because part of it is that it's not malleable in some instances. It's weird because people say a lot of contradicting things, and I think a common theme of my speeches here is going to be that I constantly rail against the left, being someone that is probably pretty far left of center myself, at least on some issues, not all of them. And I'm always open to debate with anybody about whatever they believe. But I think, the lack of malleability of identity makes it so that you can't change the system. No, that's not what I want to say. How do I want to say this? I lost my train of thought. I'm ADHD, by the way. Diagnosed, whatever. I think malleability, there's contradictions, because there's some people who say, yeah, your identity is totally fluid and malleable, but that leads to contradictions like, well, can Rachel Dolezal identify as a black woman? And it's an interesting question if you really think about it, because if, let's say you're a white person, but you're seen as black, let's say you, for some reason you have darker than usual skin and factions that might look close to African American, and let's say you spent your whole life, let's say you were adopted by an African American family and spent your whole life in a black community. Like, why is it that the single fact that your skin is white and that your ancestry is primarily European, does that remove the possibility of you being identified with that group, And, it's like, yeah, I mean, in her case, apparently, in Rachel Dolezal case, there was like some fraud and there was like misleading and, so there's some lies behind it and all that. So that's obviously wrong. But I think that that's one of the contradictions. If you can identify as anything, if I can identify as a woman, for example, I'm biologically male, but if I wanted to, should I be able to identify as a woman? Why not? Some people would say that that's a category you cannot cross, just like some people would say you can't cross racial categories. But what privileges one over the other? And so a lot of the prevailing discourse on the left that I see is contradictory, and then it's too short because it lives in the form of tweets and Instagram posts and clips and all that, so the social model of the ideas themselves are lacking. Well, I should say not the social model, the social, the structure, like the structure of the platforms that are being used. That's what I mean. By their very nature, incentivize certain kinds of content and ideas versus others, and certain kinds of conversation versus others. But yeah, I just think that if identity can be both a fixed and fluid thing, it exists in these contradictions, and they're applied in different ways based on who's speaking and what the circumstances are. And I find that unnecessary. Like, my big picture question is, why do we need identity at all? Like, why can't we just be people with characteristics but not identities, Like, why can't I just be somebody with brown hair and, light skin, or be somebody who has female genitalia and is also, worships a particular, worships God in the Islamic tradition or whatever. Like, that doesn't necessarily define who you are. Like, it's just an aspect about you. And it's that contradiction that I see in identity, is that people reinforce their own behaviors based on who they think they are, on the narrative. And so identity gives you a narrative. It says you are a Palestinian, and your identity is a Palestinian or an Israeli. And your whole life is rooted in this idea of, this is who I am. And to me, it seems very arbitrary. And one of the things that I like about the scientists, what scientists bring to the table, is that they, they say a lot of like dumb, edgy things, especially when they speak about things that are outside of their field of expertise. But sometimes they have some good takes. And, I remember Richard Dawkins, who's a famous atheist biologist, I think evolutionary biologist. I forget exactly his credentials, but he had this like shirt that said like it was like an atheist thing, and it says we're all from Africa, and I'm like, yeah, what's controversial about that? Like, we are, as far as modern science has figured out, every human being on this planet has emerged from Africa. Specifically, I think it's sub-Saharan Africa. And then we all spread out at some point or another. Like, that's not a controversial statement. And it drew a lot of controversy, as many of the other things he said. And it's like, I mean, he was doing the same thing in effect, because he was trying to create an identity around atheism, which in of itself I think has its own set of issues, similar to the ones that I've already mentioned. But that principle to me is valuable. This principle of, I guess maybe, and I'm learning as I'm speaking, like maybe there is an identity that I subscribe to, which is the idea of being human, because it goes to such a fundamental level of who we are, and it's rooted in something that is quite biological, quite, not natural. The reason we're not technically different races in the biological sense of the term is because we can all reproduce. If you take a Bushman from Australia, like an Aboriginal, and a person from, I don't know, let's think of something really random, like a person from Scotland, and you have them, have sex, and they're able to conceive, like, that's the thing, they're able to conceive. It's not like they would be unable to because of their different skin tones or lineage. We're too closely related genetically for that to happen. And so, to me, that's kind of the basis of this, like, global identity that I think is important. And I think it's something that was spoken by some of our most cherished, historical figures, like Martin Luther King. He in particular, I think, was on point about, seeing us as, like, a human family being judged by the content of our character and not the color of our skin, which is unfortunately used in, that quote is weaponized in a lot of malicious ways, I think. But people will, when I start saying these things, people will be like, yeah, but you're ignoring historical reality or the current socioeconomic reality, which is very much racialized. And I say, yeah, it is. Absolutely it is. If you go to a prison in the United States, the first thing you'll notice is that the majority of people in there are black or Hispanic. Like, disproportionate to the amount of people that they are in the population. Now, obviously, this changes from region to region, yada, yada, but that's the overall picture, is that as a proportion of the population, these identities are larger there. And there's a reason around that, right? So there's people experience harm based on the identities you choose to identify as, or society identifies for them, right? And so another, sort of counter argument that somebody might bring is like, oh, well, if you are a, if you're a black man and you don't think you're black, you're like, I'm, like a black American, like I'm just human and I don't believe in race, I'm just a dark-skinned human. And the police pull you over and you are in an area where the police are, known to act in racist ways with impunity. That's not going to save you. So the society imposes on you this racial identity, right? And so I'm not saying that, there aren't socio-economic, political, cultural things tied up with it. I'm just asking the question, do they have to be, number one? And number two, why do we continue to reinforce their existence? Like, I've always struggled with culture myself because I'm a first-generation American. All my family's from Colombia, and I love Colombia. I mean, it's like where my family's from, and it's everything. I mean, not everything, but like there's a lot to like about, that country, and all of my descendants are from there. Most of my mom's side of the family is still there. So then there's some from my dad's side of the family as well, but not as much. So like it's all like I have, I guess, an identity that society prescribes to me, which is Hispanic, right, or Latin American or whatever, and which is funny because even within the Latin American context, now they separate being Latino from being white, black, so like the racial categories, which is interesting because it's being Hispanic is often treated as a racial category, and in my eyes, it can behave as one, but I think that it I guess what I'm trying to say is that I find it interesting that it's given this extra layer, this extra dimension, or it's separated from the others, because within each Latin American country there's their own racial hierarchy. But when you come to the United States as an immigrant, especially if you come from, if you're undocumented for a period of time, whatever, it doesn't matter what you racially identify, or it matters less, I should say, here in the United States, because of this perception that all Latin Americans are one thing. But I think that that's in of itself another thing. It's like, why is it that in some countries, certain people are considered black or mulatto or white or mestizo or whatever, and in other countries they're considered something different? Like, it shows how just culturally, socially constructed these concepts are. There's no basis beyond that. It arose in a period of time in history, and because people were divided amongst these classifications, they, and therefore they were set to experience different things. They've there's repercussions of those identities that were created for the people who are born into them, right? But we continue to try to recreate that identity. We continue to try to promote its existence, even if it no longer serves a purpose, right? Not to say that it ever served a positive purpose necessarily. In fact, you can argue that in the case of race, it's always served a negative purpose. But we continue to use it and talk about it. And I remember Morgan Freeman did this thing where, like, he was asked, like, something about him being African American, and he's like, I forget exactly the question, but his answer was just like, I just don't talk about it. Like, why are we talking about it? Like, by talking about it, we bring it into existence, right? Now, a lot of people, he took a lot of flack for that, for a variety of different reasons, and people called him, like, a traitor, or, like, I don't even know, like, stupid things like that. But to me, it's like, I do, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it. I think we have to, unfortunately, because of what's happening. But I think that the end goal should be, in my opinion, and based on what I know and have come to understand, it shouldn't exist. Race as a concept should not necessarily be a thing. I'm a little bit more warm to the idea of ethnicity, but even ethnicity, I think, runs into a lot of the same problems. Like, we all create cultures, and we're all products of the cultures we came from, so I can't pretend to be like this, objective, neutral, removed entity because I have chosen not to identify as anything. No, like, I am clearly, a lot of the ideas that I hold were taught to me, some would say indoctrinated, about the United States and freedom and individual rights and collective good and all that stuff, right? And from my parents and their, especially, my mom's kind of like leftist inclinations and the history of leftist movements in South America, or Latin America. So, I can't pretend that I don't have a context in which I'm living in, but what I'm saying is, should the goal be the elimination of these categories? Because to me, I only see them as a barrier for what my goal is, which is solidarity or kinship, to use more religious terminology. Like, I really like Father Greg Boyle's, he's a famous priest a Catholic priest who works has been working for a long time and continues to work in poor Hispanic neighborhoods in LA. And he says that, like, in God's house, no one is outside of God's house. Nobody is outside. No one is irredeemable in God's house. And that means everybody has to fit in. And I like that religious language because it implies something that I think is really important, which is that we cannot. I think the solution to humanity's problems must include everybody. I don't think anyone is beyond the pale. And I think that's a difference between me and other people. And this probably comes from my Catholic upbringing. There's another set of things that have influenced me. Despite my being an agnostic now, I still like a lot of the Catholic thinking that I've been exposed to. I think that a lot of people think some people are irredeemable, like psychopathic killers and genocidal tyrants and dictators and, the worst of the worst, right? Rapists and incest and awful, awful things that humans have done. But unfortunately, and this is where maybe I started really tread into the realm of belief, like, I think unfortunately human beings, all of us are more or less capable of doing both awful things and amazing things. And I think that for those of us that are doing the awful things, let me rephrase that. Like, I think that some of us have a predisposition to certain things, right? Like some people truly, I think, might be predisposed to sociopathic behavior because of their genetics or something. Like I do think things like that happen, and I do think that not everything is just cultural. And I don't have any kind of notion that human beings are like naturally wonderful and beautiful and selfless. Like I think we are largely products of the environments we create based on an initial set of biological conditions, right? That aren't chosen. So I think that the society that I want to live in is one in which anyone can choose to identify as whatever, and also one in which everybody has everyone has the opportunity to be forgiven. And I don't know what the right answer is in terms of how to actually execute that. I have ideas that I can discuss at great length, but because it is a tough question, like how do you like forgive the worst among us? But I think that part of the dialogue, and this is where the criticism comes in of the left, on the left, is there is no redemption, there is no forgiveness, and there are people that are beyond the pale, and the group of people that are beyond the pale seems to grow every day, at least in my perception, right? And so the only way for those people to be forgiven is through what I consider to be asinine, totally self-flagellating, humiliating things. Like I've seen like at videos of like a Black Lives Matter protest where like white people were asked to like kneel and beg for forgiveness in front of black people. Like really like, like I don't think that's what creates racial healing. Now maybe those people involved thought it was wonderful and they all feel better about it. But to me as an outsider, that seems awful. It seems like a total, because I don't think we carry the sins of our fathers and mothers. I don't think we because someone is born white in 2021, that they carry the responsibility of all the awful things that their ancestors may have done. In a lot of cases, many of them didn't do it because they were like more recent immigrants, like from Russia or Ireland or whatever the fuck. But I just think that all of us can't carry the legacy of harm, because like another thing with identity is like how far back do we trace, right? Like I see like in the Latino community, I see a lot of like people really playing up their indigenous roots, right? They're like, oh man, I'm so Native American, I just like love my culture. I'm claiming all the indigenous things from whatever tribe I'm affiliated or think I am affiliated with. And in some cases, like, I mean, it's actual, like today indigenous Latinos, which I guess is different, but in a lot of cases, there's people from mixed ancestry. A lot of, like myself, like part of my ancestry is European and part of my ancestry is indigenous. And I don't exactly know what the proportions are or who raped who, But Latin America, in large part, is this product of this massive rape of like, Spanish colonizers on Native American women. And, I just think that who do you, like, both of those bloodlines are within you. So, like, why is it that you can highlight one and deny the other? Like, it seems to me like a contradiction. And it all seems kind of silly to me. It's like, why can't all humans just not claim? I think claim has a connotation of ownership, but like make use of everything from previous cultures, right? And that they may not be affiliated with. Who knows? Like, we use algebra, and I don't constantly pay homage to, I think it was like Muslim scholars, I forget, I think it was in the Middle East, that came up with what we understand as algebra. I don't constantly, like, what if someone's like, well, you don't descend from there, therefore you can't use algebra. Like, I guess that's a cultural appropriation thing. And look, I think there's a lot of positive sentiment around, like, acknowledging where things come from and giving credit to where credit is due, right? Versus just appropriating something and claiming it only as your own, especially at the detriment of the people who are more closely affiliated with this individual that you're claiming. But yeah, I think that identity, it has so many contradictions and flaws and errors in its thinking and the way it's constructed and the way it's described, that I think it causes more harm than good. And so my vision of the world maybe is one where, like, we're like, fuck it, let's just all identify as human. And, like, obviously we're all different, from even if we just all decided to say we're human, we speak different languages, we worship different gods or don't, we, perform different sexual roles, we, have different accents, whatever, appearances, obviously. But that, at least having that common baseline understanding that we're all family. I really like, I think it was Pope Francis recently came out with this thing called Fratelli Tutti, which was in itself, seen as sexist because it's we're all brothers. But that point aside, like, I love the idea that we're all this human family. And you can make genetic arguments that we are. I mean, we all come from a mitochondrial Eve that existed whatever many years ago. So that woman is the mother of all humans alive today. All of her siblings that lived with her at the time and cousins and whatever, they all died out. None of the people alive today are, like, the only person that we all connect back to is called this mitochondrial Eve. And in terms of Adam, the Y chromosomal Adam, that's a different man that existed at a different time. But that every man alive today, his Y chromosome comes from this person. So you can even make a biological argument that we're all one human family. It depends on how back you want to take the clock. And so for me, identity is like people choosing when to move the clock back and just working with that. And then everything that follows, once you select an identity, then it sort of locks in what you're for and what you're against, right? So because it's based on your own idea of what's in your interest. And it's hard because, in a system where there's a power imbalance and there's, ostensibly people who are more the quote-unquote oppressors and the oppressed, you do have an issue where, like, some people want to dissolve your identity, like in a form of ethnic cleansing, and have you be assimilated by abandoning your pre-existing beliefs, right? And so maybe in some sense, I'm kind of advocating for a global form of ethnic cleansing, which sounds awful. But, I think that I guess I should boil things down, which is, what is the utility of identity? What does it do for us? And I don't think it does a lot of good things, to be honest. I mean, in Eastern philosophy, it's talked about how, the ego, this sense of self, is such a problem because it forces everything to be, like, a lot of things all of a sudden become threats to your survival, even if they're not, because it's like, for example, like, you might identify with an idea or a religion, and so if someone says that religion sucks, you take it as they're saying I suck, right? And that's not a necessary identification that needs to happen, right? And so I think, there's a lot of powerful arguments that come from Eastern philosophy of saying the way we think of ourselves as I am a man or I am an American, these are all things that do not speak to the greater truth of who we are, what's deep inside. And I think their spiritual understanding of it, of all of us having this like sort of soul or divinity or this common whatever, Atman, as it is in the Hindu tradition, or is it Brahmin? Atman? I forget. But, just like this common essence, like that essence is a concept, right? I mean, and there's no scientific evidence that it exists, but that concept allows us to create a new kind of relation, because it says, well, since we all have this common essence and we all descend from the same lineage or whatever, then we're all this human family. And so therefore, it follows that we should apply family relationship dynamics to the world. And I think that's fair. And I think my global vision is for one human family. And does that mean everyone has to look the same or talk the same or believe in the same things? Not necessarily, but there has to be some common understanding that is agreed upon and enforced. And for me, that's one that respects like some of those things I said earlier, like the freedom to choose how to behave, to believe in what you want to believe, to do what your skills are in the world that is helpful towards others or even productive. Like I think that's the end game. And I just think that because we're so fixed in our respective tribes, that we reach these irreconcilable differences that have no solution, as if you maintain those existing identities, like Israel and Palestine being a great example. Now, let me be totally clear. I think what's happening there is a genocide being done by the state of Israel towards the Palestinian people. I don't think they are acting primarily in self-defense. I think it's more of an apartheid situation, given the enormous power imbalance. But I find it hard to see if people who lived in Israel and Palestine thought of themselves as a common people, even if they have religious differences, right, and maybe different ethnic histories, if there's this commonality of like they are my brothers and sisters, like seeing that familiarity in others and that familial bond, I think is what will allow us to overcome some of these conflicts. And to do that, there's a process which I couldn't even begin to try to describe. I mean, I have some ideas of what healing and reconciliation and justice means, but it's not. I'm not trivializing the what I'm proposing. But what I'm saying is, I don't want to be bound to forever live the traumas and the cycle of violence of my ancestors. And I feel like because if you so identify with the group that you were assigned with at birth or whatever, whether that's a type of nationalism like being an American or, a religious, like being a Catholic or Hindu, whatever. If that is the kind of the end all be all, the people outside of that circle, if you don't at least grant them humanity, like in an equal sense of like that you would see people of the same group as, I think it allows for certain kinds of evils and harm to exist, because then you can dehumanize and you can say those people are not truly human because they're not followers of Christ, or those people are not fully my brother because they are oppressors and I'm the oppressed, and my current situation is the fault of them and their ancestors. And I just don't think that, I guess my main impetus here, impetus is I want to unite the human family. And I just wanted to unite on a common understanding that we are all brothers and sisters, and that there's nowhere else for us to go. Like, yeah, I mean, we can go to Mars and stuff, but we'd probably die out pretty quick. Like, there's not like a home for us that's as habitable and as, like, we literally have evolved for existence on Earth. And as a result, because of climate change, kind of puts the pressure, the gas on the pedal, or the pushes the gas pedal. You know what I mean? It accelerates things, really, really intensely. I feel like we have to come to some kind of global understanding of what it means to be human, and I think it has to be freely accepted. It's not something that I or anyone can or should impose. I think that's probably the next step in our, evolution, is that, you think of human cells, not just human cells, just like cells in general, how we evolved from complex chemical arrangements just replicating into, structures that have a different internal environment than external environment, into these systems, these different cells, being absorbed into one another and beginning to serve like particular functions, until these groups of cells beginning to like behave in coordination, and so on and so forth, to the point that you get to complex life like us, where we are composed of a variety of tiny, tiny cells that all seemingly act individually, but they are what creates the experience of being human. And this is also why I think we're gigantic. I think human beings are enormous compared to like a lot of life, which is like insects and stuff. So I think we're like giants in the world, just like stomping around. But yeah, so I think I've said enough for today. Reality is kind of coming back to me, and I feel like I have to do other things to keep the ball rolling in my own life. But this is the first time I wanted to just put some things out there. I hope that this doesn't cause me great harm, and that in fact it causes me great joy. But to anybody listening, if there is anybody, I love you. You are my family. I can't promise we'd be friends or get along, but I can promise that I love you and acknowledge your human dignity and wish you success and joy and in flourishing in this life. And try to connect with me. Try to see if there's a point where we can become allies, because I'm seeking allies. I know very well that I can't do this on my own, whatever this vague mission that I have is. And but I'm eager to try to do it. And that's kind of just my thing, is trying to bring dreams to life. So if you're out there and you like what I'm saying, let's see what we can do together.